Hi guys, welcome back to the Mature Movers podcast. Today we are going to be talking to Nick Sanderson, founder and CEO of Audley Group, the UK's largest developer and operator of luxury retirement villages. Nick is hugely influential within the retirement living sector at a national and international level, where he often appears as a key speaker and advisor. Nick also enjoys skiing, running and cycling, and will be fundraising for the Audley Foundation by doing 6 kilometres of running and 100 kilometres of cycling. So welcome, Nick. Thank you so much for coming and talking to me today. My first question today is, how did you first get into the later life sector?
Well, no, it's nice to be here. I got involved through a slightly circuitous route. I can't say it was a life plan. It wasn't something I was thinking about at doing my A-levels, thinking that's a good place to go. My background actually was in house building. Actually, my father was a house builder, so I grew up being dragged around building sites and things to look at when I was young. And it seemed a natural thing for me to do after my education, to go and learn to work with him. Actually a few years, which I did, to learn about all of the different aspects of house building. And then, of course, I was about 22, 23. So I, as you do at 22, 23, I thought I must have learned everything about it by now. So time to go and do something else. And my sister's boyfriend, as these things randomly happen, was a doctor. He just qualified. He was at the same school as me, but he'd just come back from Oxford. He'd just qualified, done his first couple of years as a locum. And we were in the pub one night, as you are, and we were talking about the fact we both knew everything about medicine and house building. We ought to do something together. And we agreed we'd start a business together. And it was involved originally, this is a way long time ago, before you were born, back in the 80s, when everything to do with caring for older people was just rubbish, awful. And the residential care sector particularly was just beginning to grow. It was changing from being state-funded to privately provided, and still mostly state-funded. And so we decided that's where we'd go. So we set up a care home business. We managed to persuade, I still to this day have no idea how, but we managed to persuade a big private equity backer to back us. And off we went. So I think I was about 20, I was about 24, I think. Andrew was a bit older, but not much. And that's how I got started.
Brilliant. That's very, very inspiring, especially because that's so close to my age.
Yeah.
To be so ambitious and kind of take so many risks as well. And I guess it's that naivety as a young person, and kind of that self-belief that you can do whatever you kind of want to set your mind to, which is brilliant.
It's true. Actually, interestingly now, I see it much more because your generation talk about wanting to become entrepreneurs. You know, nobody talked about that when I was young. You had a very much more defined career pattern. But now actually so many young people want to get into business. It's great. I love it. I love that spirit of enterprise. But yes, it was unusual for us at that time.
And I'm assuming that the idea of focusing this new care, this care home was as a result of your brother-in-law recognising the need for this within the care sector, and then your background within building and property.
Yeah, no, he never actually became my brother-in-law. He was a friend. He was just my sister's brother.
Sorry.
So, yeah, that's another story. But yes, it was an unusual combination of development experience, but also the healthcare provision, obviously, within the care sector. And we particularly wanted to major on older people for a very obvious reason. The first thing we did, actually, was to go and look. So we pretended we were looking for I remember, great aunt, grandmother, whatever, and we went round half a dozen care homes. We were both in Kent at the time, and they were just awful, absolutely horrible. I was profoundly depressed by it. It's like most people before that, I just had experience of my grandmother, and she lived a reasonably contented old age. So suddenly I was exposed to these awful institutional settings. And we sort of got to a point where we thought, well, there's two things we can do here. One is just to run away from this and say, I don't have anything to do with something that's just so depressing. Or the other is to try and have a go at doing it better. And that's what we did. And we used, I suppose, my development background to look, and we said, we're never going to convert old buildings. We'll build from scratch. We'll build purpose-built, which nobody was doing. Everybody will live in a single bedroom and ensuite bathroom. And there were things back that length of time ago nobody was doing. Everything was very institutional. So it was a different response, and it was probably a young person's response actually to what we saw old people were suffering from. And that's how got started.
Wow, it's very, very inspirational. And that was called Beaumont.
That was Beaumont, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. And with Beaumont, I'm assuming you just decided to make it better, and then you moved on from Beaumont to Audley. And I mean, feel free to describe the differences. And I'm assuming, shouldn't assume, but I mean, I'm assuming that you learned from your mistakes with Beaumont. I mean, I'm not saying that you made many mistakes, but
oh yes, no,
that's how you. Yeah.
you do.
So that's kind of how that idea developed and formed, and then eventually came out to be Audley.
Yeah, it was, and it was again going back to my background actually. So the one thing any older person will ever tell you anywhere, stop them in the street and say, what's your vision for how you would want to live in old age? And 95% of them will say to you, I want to stay living in a home of my own for as long as possible, stay independent, do not want to be institutionalized, go into care. I want to delay it for as short a period as possible. So what I saw with care homes, and they were lovely, what we were developing, they were very state-of-the-art, much better, and were very successful. But it wasn't, truthfully, between you and I, it wasn't that difficult to be successful because the rest of it was so awful. But anyway, that's by the by. We then saw a lot of people coming in who were coming in much too early. They didn't need to come into a residential institutional care setting, but they came because they'd run out of options in their own home. They couldn't be supported properly. So it was, again, probably at the pub one night, we decided, well, let's combine my background in housing with what we're providing with a residential care setting. And when we go and build a care home somewhere, alongside it, we'll build some houses or apartments. And we'll give people the opportunity to live in a home of their own, which they can buy and own, which is very important psychologically, gives them independence, but have all the facilities of the care home right next door. So if ever they need anything, they just push a button, give a call, and somebody will come and deal with their issues. And it was as simple as that, really. And everybody, when we then built our first project that combined the two up in Stratford-on-Avon back in the late 80s, and we had queues round the block for the housing. Everybody said, well, I don't want to go into a bedroom in a care home where I'm told what time I get up, what time I go to bed, where I sit, whatever. I want to live in that little bungalow over there on my own, independently. And when someone comes to support me, it's on my terms in my home when I want them there. And it's a subtle but fundamental difference because it's leaving control in people's own hands. So it was from there that Audley grew. Beaumont became part of a bigger care home group because we had all these care homes. And I started Audley in the early 90s, really to take that whole concept forward and say, well, everybody wants to live in a home of their own. Let's just provide them with homes of their own, but make sure they have the sort of support services available to them in that home that they would have had otherwise in residential care. That's what we do now.
Where did this idea of luxury retirement living, and I mean luxury, so for people who haven't ever heard of Audley or seen an Audley village, there are swimming pools, and they're not just any kind of swimming pools, they're beautiful swimming pools, surrounded by beautiful gardens and like amazing cafeterias and libraries. What gave you that idea to kind of install these into the care settings?
Our villages have been described as the Soho house of the retirement world, and they are. They're wonderful. I mean, they have great restaurants, award-winning restaurants, great spas, wonderful grounds, and just really good at quality housing for people. It was partly commercially driven to focus on the more luxury end, the high end of the market. It's a limited market because obviously there's not so many areas you can go and people who can afford it. But we wanted to establish it as a relatively high-end brand before we then took it to a more mid-market, which I'll come back to in a minute because that's what we do now. In terms of the quality of what we create, I always get annoyed actually that we still surprise people, because we do. People walk in and go, "Oh, this is surprising. Why do you, this is what I expected." And the presumption behind that is, well, why would anybody who's just because they're older have anything that's substandard or not as good as it is for younger people? And why shouldn't they have great luxury, great interior design, wonderful swimming pools, wonderful facilities? Of course they should, because they're only just you or me, but older. So why suddenly, just because you get older, would you expect to have something less? But it does surprise people. And it's for that very reason, actually, we want our customers to believe that they're treated with as much respect in every way as the mainstream population, because that's who they are. They are the mainstream population. They're just a bit older. So we always deliver something we think that probably exceeds their expectations, but because we want to exceed their expectations, because they deserve it. And it works.
I think yeah, absolutely. And I think what you just said is really important about treating older adults equally, because in the past, that's not how older adults have been treated, especially any people suffering with mental health or physical health conditions. I'm sure you've been listening or aware of at the moment, kind of this discussion around like cashless parking and paying for parking via an app. And I was recently listening to somebody speak about this and kind of saying, well, the world's moving along and people need to learn to use their mobile phones and their apps and things like that. But I think there's another point of view to this. And the fact is that these older people have lived incredible lives, whether they've been very lucky to live fantastic lives to a weekly, daily struggle throughout their life, and they kind of have a right to do what they want. And if they don't want to use apps and they don't want to have to be forced to move along with the times, then they absolutely have that right to be treated the way that they want to, and not be treated. And it's like being treated as a child, like I'm telling you that you have to do this. And in my opinion, that's wrong. And things need to be accessible, and we need to not forget, or we need to respect older adults, and I definitely see that whether it's walking park, because we've got an Audley Village literally 5 minutes from where I am right now, and I walk past it with my dog quite regularly, and I just think this is where I would like to end up, and I feel absolutely special, and like I've worked my butt off my whole life to get to this point and say, actually, I want to really enjoy my retirement and be surrounded by beautiful things and beautiful kind people and things like that. So I do think that your belief in the way that people should be treated is resonated by that Audley ethos, and whether it's the way that the buildings architecture is to the small little designs and things like that. So one, thank you for starting that and kick-starting that.
Well, you're
people
right.
like me can retire there.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it's the one thing that our customers spot first and foremost before anything else is being patronized, and they do. And it's this, and actually some of the worst people are younger people, to be honest, who I see it all the time. You sit and talk about what we do, and they think, oh, that's nice, poor old things, how lovely that they still have somewhere nice to live. Well, those poor old things have infinitely more wisdom and knowledge and experience. We're a strange society like that. With the British are almost the worst I know. It's completely the reverse in certain, take India. In India, age means wisdom. You're revered for the number of years you've lived. You're considered to be a bigger contributor to everything because of your experience. We just have this ridiculous idea that you get to 65 and that's when you've suddenly lost all economic, social relevance to society, which is just rubbish, nonsense. What we try to do to correct that is just to treat people. We have it all the time with internally as a business. One of our big maxims is older people are just you, but older. So treat them with respect. Treat them the same as you'd expect. Also, don't carve out exceptions for them to talk about them as a different category. They're not. They're just the same people. That's all we've ever tried to do. Interestingly enough, that sometimes they can be their own worst enemies, though, because our biggest challenge, truthfully, is getting people to our villages. Because when they get there, like they look at it and go, well, why wouldn't I do this? This is obvious. I can move from my bigger house, I can downsize, it's economically sensible, I can live with like-minded people with great support, wonderful, great lifestyle, be looked after, stay independent as long as possible. So what's not to like about it? Well, most of them would say, if they didn't know anything about it, I don't want to live with all those old people. I'm not really going to live with any group of old people. You say, well, how old are you? And they say, well, I'm 78. You say, well, what do you mean then by old people? Who are you talking about? Because actually those people you're talking about are you and your peers and your friends, the people you worked with, the people you were at school with, the people who you played sport with. That's who they are. And they say, well, no, I don't mean it like that. I just mean old people. What they actually mean is frail people, actually, is what they mean.
Yeah.
Because actually it's nothing about that. People are the same. They are just, they are themselves categorizing old people in a different way because they don't want to be associated with being old themselves.
Yeah, it's true, and I see that. Like I often see that there's this like self-discriminating language, and like as somebody who's such a pro-aging person, I now notice it as soon as somebody says it, and my heart kind of comes up into my throat, and I'm like, oh, like you shouldn't say that. Whereas to everybody else in the room, it would just be normal language. So I completely understand.
It's fundamentally wrong. I had a piece of work done for me by our in-house counsel the other day about discrimination policy, age discrimination policy. We had a really unusual one where in Clapham we had a young person who had been round the village. In fact, I think had joined our club because we have external members of the clubs, and was complaining about the fact there was an age restriction on moving in, saying you have to be 60 to move in, and she was 50, and saying it's wrong, it's discriminatory. Why should I not be able to move in? Which is an interesting point because it is discriminatory in that sense. But the reality is nobody thinks about being condemning of older people and their fads and whatever, dislikes, whatever. They say things about them, they'd never say it in the context of race, gender, sexuality, or anything else. They just talk about old people. The very expression is damning, isn't it? Poor old pensioners, poor old things, old age pensions, OAPs. It's awful language. They're just not, and it naturally stigmatizes them. And it also, unfortunately, keeps people away from embracing change and good stuff, like I think we do, because they don't want to be associated with it. They push it away for too long. Actually, what ends to happen then is because they don't engage in the conversation early enough, they have a crisis, which means they actually end up exactly where they didn't want to be, which is being institutionalized. So the sooner they embrace the fact that they're getting older and celebrate it and say, now I've got a chance to move into something like Audley do and live a great life and have a better quality of life and outcome. The sooner they do that, the better.
Absolutely, yeah. And I do think that it's that is getting better compared to like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And I know that's not a long time, but the change within 2 years I've seen is massive, especially, I mean, the pandemic's obviously had such a huge impact on the industry in general, but it's also opened up the world's eyes. It's kind of like, the Mr. Bean, like matchstick thing, like, and put the matchsticks in your eyes and said, like, look at what's going on in the care industry and like what we need to recognize, and that like, we are living in an aging society. We need to acknowledge that as young people, and we need to start thinking about our futures. And if we want that to change when we're in our 70s, 80s, 90s, we need to do something about it now. So hopefully it's getting better. And I know
I do think
that,
it is. I do, honestly, over the time since Andrew and I started back in the 80s, it's taken too long, far too long, but it is changing. I've noticed it more in the last 2 years, absolutely. The pandemic has shone a light on the fact that just doing nothing and staying in your big family house, isolated, alone, without support, without access to local services, is not a smart thing to do necessarily. Because if you'd made the choice to move into one of our villages pre-pandemic, they had a whale of a time. You know, they were still living independently, were safe, secure, able to isolate, but we were there to support them, do their shopping, keep them entertained, do whatever was necessary to make sure they had as positive an outcome as they could. And consequently, we had very low infection levels and kept them very, very safe. So I think it has shone a light on it. But actually, if I go back over 10 or 20 years, we've now got the sort of leading edge of baby boomers coming through now into their 70s. They are, I can't tell you how different they are to when I started 30 years ago. They are so different. If I had a 70-year-old customer, think about it and make the maths easy. If I had a 70-year-old customer in 1990, or 1980, they were born in 1910. So they grew up, they remember the end of the First World War. They were at school during the general strike, depression of the 30s. They fought in the Second World War and then had a miserable time through the recession of the 50s. And by the time they got to us, and being our customer at 70, they were exhausted and tired and just took what they were given. And they came from that generation, you know, don't complain, explain. Or don't explain, don't complain. Make do and mend, take what you're given. Think yourself lucky. Now, I've got a 70-year-old customer, you know, they were born when? 1942 or 1952, sorry. You know, they're younger than Mick Jagger. You know, they were 10 when the Beatles had their first #1. They all went off to university, grant funded. They all got jobs easily. They've earned a lot of money. They've made a fortune out of owning a house. They've traveled the world, free, cheap travel. They are completely different. And they've also seen how miserable it was for their parents. And that they had to put up with grotty, institutionalized care homes and hospital beds. And they're not going to have it. They won't have it. So there is a change coming, and it's already happened in the States and Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and places. They've already accepted it. America had what we had 25 years ago, and you know, we're just kept playing catch up. We've been very slow here in the UK, very slow, but it's coming.
Yeah, and I was actually, I keep telling people that, and it's really hard to kind of prove that. But it's quite refreshing to hear somebody else who's obviously been in this space for so long to say that, because obviously my background is health and fitness, and whether it's talking about health and fitness within the care sector to health and fitness in other areas, we are, as the UK, we are so behind in kind of what we're offering. Like, you've got people offering virtual reality and augmented reality within care homes in America and Australia to promote things like cognition improvement and eye-hand coordination improvement and things like that. Whereas, and I mean, because I'm researching this stuff all the time, I'm finding out about all these amazing gadgets, but I talked to somebody in the UK about it, and they don't even have the basic well-being opportunities available. And it's heartbreaking because we've got all this technology and all these opportunities and all these great minds saying, we've got the research to prove that this does this, and this is going to really facilitate later life, whether it's happiness, independence, mood kind of balance. And we're just not doing anything. We're not doing enough. And
it's again, I mean, we do a lot of, we've got a lot of work going on at the moment in terms of, because we have a great opportunity. Think about it. Someone moves into one of our villages, we're able to, and we do, they have an initial assessment with us same as if they were coming to you for a health and fitness and health and wellbeing assessment. And it's about adapting their home if it needs it, giving them support if they need it, but also about their physical and mental well-being. So much you can do, and the examples we have around the country of improvement. It's a very strange thing, which I learned very early on when I was in this space, is people don't expect improvement. They think they're on a path of gradual decline. And they don't realize how you can reverse, not only maintain health, but reverse frailty. And we see some fantastic examples. Like we've got trainers all around the country in our gyms who do some amazing work. I hear it all the time, people who are back walking after a stroke, or swimming in a pool and they haven't swum in a pool since they were 15. It's amazing what happens. And the quality of life and enhancement you give, as well, by the way, as good nutrition, but it's not just physical activity, it's also mental stimulation as well. Keeping them, as you say, cognitively aware, whether it could be as simple as just joining a quiz night once a week, or engaging with owners and we have these great things where they tell stories of their lives. One person every week will tell their history, and then they have questions. It's thought-provoking engagement, and it's not just this miserable world I first saw when I started, which is, well, you're finished now. It's just a question of how quickly the end comes. So different. It's great. It has all sorts of implications, by the way, because of course, if you get to people early, get that sort of engagement, get them to be physically, mentally active, the outcome becomes much better. Their life expectancy extends. Now, that does have implications for the country, but it also has, keeping them safe for longer has huge implications for the NHS and social care, which is in crisis, absolute massive crisis. So the very fact that we're able to keep people active and engaged for longer has huge downstream benefits, not just for the individual, but for society as a whole. And who wants to have a miserable end? Make it fun. And we do.
No, and that's. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but that's a constant daily battle I have with people, and this isn't usually the people I'm working with who are 70 plus recognise that they need to just keep moving. It's the 40s, 50s and 60s who are like, oh, by the time I'm 90, I hope I'm not doing any exercise. And it's like, actually, it's the opposite. You have to continue, you have to do this for the rest of your life. And if you start now, you will reap the rewards in your 90s, rather than if you don't start now and you start later, it's going to be a bigger struggle, or you've been doing it for a certain amount of time and you stop and you're like,
it goes back to the age thing earlier. People talk about age as a measurement. It's not age, it's about your state of your health and well-being, actually, because I see fantastically fit 80-year-olds. I saw someone in the gym on the rowing machine at Chelfont this morning. Probably, I don't know how he is, probably in his 80s, mid-80s. But he's in there rowing. He actually has had a stroke, so he's rehabilitated to some extent. But and I can tell you, he will be, and you know better than I do, he will be fitter than an unfit, overweight 40-year-old. Absolutely fitter in terms of his cardiothoracic health and everything else. He will be, and you can do that, and he'll be happier as a result. And he won't be a user of the NHS. Or end up in a care home bed, which is where we started this point, which is what everyone's trying to avoid.
Yeah, absolutely. So why do you think that Audley Villages are so triumphant in what they do? And obviously it's hard to you seem quite modest, so it's hard to kind of toot your own horn, but they are very successful, and kind of I keep up to date with kind of what the things that you're doing, and you're constantly innovating and constantly building, and you've got more opportunities left, right and centre. Do you think that is? Do you think it comes down to ethos? Do you think it comes down to the employees, or where do you think the push is coming from?
Yeah, well, it is. You're right. It's about employees. we talk a lot about hardware and software. It's the same principle. You can have the best hardware in the world for your laptop, but if you don't have the right software running it, doesn't work, and vice versa, actually. So we can build the best buildings in the world and they all look amazing and they've got interior design and great swimming pools, as you said earlier. But what makes them come to life is the people, the staff that we have. And we're blessed with amazing staff. I mean, because of what we do, and I think why we encourage them to believe in the values we've talked about on this call. So the staff is critical. The one thing I'd say is listening. We listen to our staff. We also listen fundamentally to our customers. And because of what I was recognizing earlier about how they've changed over the years, it's meant we've had to continue to evolve. You know, we don't do the same now as we did 20, 25 years ago. We've listened all the time to what works, what doesn't work, and we've modified the offer and what it is we've done. And I'd like to think that's the root of our success. The other thing is you can't just listen and then improve the next one. You do have to go back to what we were building 20 years ago and make sure you upgrade both the hardware and the software to do that. And actually health and well-being we've just been talking about is a big part of that. Actually, we're much more engaged in the lives of our customers now in hoping to improve their outcomes for them. Is just one example of the way we've improved. So I think it's continually embracing change, not being frightened of change, not just saying that's what we do, lock it in, let's carry on doing it. It's just listening all the time. I'd like to think that's what it does, but you know, we just got great. We've got 1,000 staff now, something like 1,000 staff. 94% of them are proud to work for us. You know, we have really high ratings from our owners, equivalent to Apple, in terms of customer satisfaction and belief in us, and I'm immensely proud of it. One thing that's really good now, of course, is we're big enough and that we are growing our own. So I was actually with the general manager at Chalfont earlier, who's just going on to run our first Mayfield village. Mayfield is our more affordable alternative in Watford. And Nick's going on to run it. And he was asking me about it. He's saying, he said, you must be thrilled that people like me are going off to do the next generation of what we do, because if they're your own people and they've bought into our culture, we don't want to lose them. We want them to stay with us and take it and breed it through the next staff he's recruiting and owners. It's just a continuous process. Never rests though, unfortunately.
And do you think that's come from you and the kind of the starting founders of Audley, or do you think that's something you learnt as you guys evolved?
Well, I think it goes right back to the very beginning of the conversation. You know, what I learnt from my father, from my family, from everything. What, you know, that a lot of it is, do you know what? Most of it is just good common sense. And most of it, again, is what I was talking about earlier, which is put yourself in the place of your customers, deliver them something that you'd be happy with and proud of, and you won't go too far wrong. That's what we've always done, start with.
Yeah, brilliant. Because I think, I mean, like employee satisfaction is so hard to come by within care organisations. And it seems like quite a modern approach to the way that you treat your employees, although it shouldn't be, which is kind of why I asked, because when I've looked, we have these constant discussions, whether it's from the government on the radio or whoever you're talking to, about how the high job demand within the care sector, and why that is, and at the end of the day, I truly believe it's down to the way that people are treating their employees, and people would want to work in that sector if it was attractive enough, but also people were cared for. And I think obviously you're in the care sector to care for people, but no, those people giving that care aren't being cared for themselves. I just saw how poorly their I hope you can still hear me.
Yeah.
How poorly their staff were being treated. And it wasn't just the mental aspect, it was the physical aspect, and how sedentary these people's lives were, and you could really see that how it was affecting them as a whole, and their soul was like really like drained.
Well, I think
it's absolutely heartbreaking.
Well, I think it's a there's a long conversation about the future of social care, but the care home model, the institutional, let's put 60 people in individual rooms and then tell them how they live their lives, is broken. I think it's broken because the limitations on what you do has set up a staffing model which is very skinny, doesn't provide anything like enough. And the whole fee structure, that particularly what local authorities pay, doesn't pay for anything more than that. It's just broken. And it's not, as you say, therefore, a setting that people want to work in and want to feel proud of. And I think what we've discussed today, if it works, which it will work, and it does, we've got evidence that it works, you create much nicer environments, not only for people to live, but for people to work in. The outcomes are positive, therefore staff feel contentment with what they've achieved. Hopefully we can reward them properly because of the model is prepared to pay for it, because our customers are willing to pay for it. But mostly what you're doing, therefore, by keeping them independent and safe for longer, is avoiding them ever needing to end up in that care sector. So it will hopefully change the provision of care homes in this country to only really providing for people who have quite complex needs towards the end of their lives for a shorter stay. And that's what they should be doing. And then hopefully they will be they'll have to be more professional, they'll have to employ higher quality staff, they'll have to charge more, but for a shorter period. And that might hopefully reinvigorate the care home model, because otherwise it is just broken.
Absolutely. Right, well, my last question is, will you retire to an Audley Village one day?
Well, that's a really tricky question. You'd have to ask my wife more than me, actually. But yes, actually, I genuinely would, because why wouldn't you? Great. Actually, I'm not allowed to have favourites, obviously, around the country. I love Yorkshire, and we've got a wonderful village in Derbyshire. And actually, Bristol's pretty good. Yeah, no, I don't have a favourite. We're in London now, we're in Clapham, which is sort of where I live most of the time, so I'm tempted with that. But yes, I would. And why shouldn't I? That's the whole point.
Absolutely, brilliant. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today and sharing all your thoughts and feelings and your background as well, and being so open about it. So if anyone's listening and to find out more, the best place for them to go and look?
Best to go to the website, audleyvillages.com. You'll get access to all our villages, see more about who we are and what we do. And we'd love to see you.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Nick.
It's been my pleasure.